Cartoons are The Beetlejuice threw kids straight into the netherworld, a dimension where everything looked like it was designed by a sleep-deprived art student who got too obsessed with optical illusions. Every episode had some strange new location: the roadhouse, the monster across the street, the moose-headed monster judge, even the place where giant insects ran a fast food joint. The world wasn't just weird, it was unstable. Gravity flipped, doors opened into mouths, and characters stretched, deflated, or exploded because Beetlejuice felt like doing it. Specific episodes burned into kids' memories. In Quit While You're Ahead, Beetlejuice literally removes his head and swaps it with random ones throughout the episode.
Nothing happened. I've lost my powers. I'm on a juice.
You need your whole body to do magic, Beetlejuice, remember?
Oh, yeah.
In Skeletons in the Closet, Lydia is attacked by physical skeletons that crawl out of her closet like a miniature horror movie. And in Dandy Handyman, Beetlejuice's body falls apart piece by piece until he becomes a walking junk pile of limbs and loose parts. None of this was played as scary, which somehow made it even more unsettling, because nothing on TV looked like this yet. Kids who watched it remember that feeling of not knowing what Beetlejuice would turn into next. A worm, a bomb, a giant shoe maybe, and that unpredictability is what stuck with them long after the theme song stopped playing.
You are my true friend. Friend? I'm your friend? Why, of course. You're the biggest friend I've ever had.
Ren and Stimpy felt like a cartoon that actively enjoyed making its audience uncomfortable. The episodes weren't just weird, they had moments that crossed into straight-up body horror. Kids who saw Stimpy's first hairball watched a close-up of Stimpy hacking up a massive hairball covered in slime and veins. Ren's toothache showed Ren's decaying gums in extreme detail, complete with throbbing nerves and yellow bones. And Black Hole had the characters stretched and distorted into shapes that honestly looked painful. The show also dove into disturbing emotional territory. In Stimpy's fan club, Ren has a full psychological breakdown in a dark room, ranting to himself while his face twists into expressions that look like they belong in a psychological thriller, not a Nickelodeon block. Even the jokes walked a line adults recognized but kids couldn't explain. Things felt wrong, even if they didn't know why. Behind the scenes, animators worked almost without restraint. The infamous gross close-ups were painted separately in a detailed, realistic style that clashed violently with the rest of the show.
Don't you know cartoons will ruin your mind? Look what it's done to your brain.
The creators liked pushing boundaries just to see what Nickelodeon would let slip through. That's how we ended up with Ren licking up Stimpy's sweat in one episode, Stimpy giving birth to a fart in another, and Ren slicing a character's belly open in the band episode, Man's Best Friend, which only resurfaced years later. Kids didn't forget Ren and Stimpy because it scared them like a horror movie. They remembered it because it made them genuinely uneasy in a way that no other cartoon on TV did. The Brothers Grunt is one of those shows people remember in the same way they remember a bizarre dream. Not clearly, but you definitely felt it. It aired on MTV at a time when the network was actively trying to build an identity for adult animation, and for some reason, they decided this was the direction to go. The premise is technically about a group of creatures searching for their missing brother Frank, who's destined to be the chosen one. But honestly, the plot didn't matter. The grunts were unsettling. They looked like sickly, bloated humanoids with jaundiced skin, bulging eyes, and mouths that always seemed slightly too wet. They moved in twitchy, jerky motions that made them look like their bodies were glitching. They constantly sweated, groaned, grunted, chewed on things, and made noises that sounded like someone recorded a man trying to breathe through a clogged snorkel.
Stand before you tonight, their studies and meditations complete. What do you say? Are they in?
Watching them walk down a hallway felt weirdly stressful. Individual episodes were even stranger. One episode has them trekking through a grimy sewer system, sliding down pipes while screaming incoherently. Another features them following a trail of mysteriously dripping goo, convinced it would lead them to Frank. Backgrounds always looked damp, moldy, or abandoned. Everything felt in a way that wasn't violent or graphic, just deeply uncomfortable. Kids expected cartoons to be colorful and lively, not gray, sweaty, and full of heavy breathing. Danny Antonucci created the show years before he made Ed, Edd and Eddy, which is wild to think about because this series couldn't be more different. MTV wanted something shockingly weird, and he delivered exactly that. The Brothers Grunt didn't traumatize kids because it was scary. It traumatized them because it looked like something they weren't supposed to be watching, and their brains knew it even if they didn't.
What did I do?
Courage the Cowardly Dog didn't scare kids by shouting or throwing monsters at the screen. It got under your skin by making everything feel a little too quiet. That farmhouse sat in the middle of nowhere with miles of empty land in every direction, and the show loved reminding you that Courage was basically alone out there. Half the tension came from the silence. Ask anyone who watched it as a kid, and they'll mention a different moment that stuck with them. Most people immediately think of Return the Slab, with that sniff early CGI ghost drifting toward the house like something you'd find hidden on an old computer. Others bring up Freaky Fred, the soft-spoken barber whose smile never moved and whose calm little monologue about being naughty felt way too real. And then there's Cats, the red, smooth-talking villain who treated Courage like a problem he needed to fix. He never raised his voice. Somehow that made him even worse.
Now you're going to learn why no one ever checks out of the Cat's Motel.
Even the episodes that weren't scary had this strange, uneasy vibe. The wind didn't sound like normal wind. The sky stayed empty a little too long. The shadows moved as if something was wandering around off screen. As a kid, you couldn't explain it, but you could feel it. Something was always just slightly wrong. One moment that lives rent-free in a lot of people's heads is the blue porcelain-looking figure from Perfect. It appears out of nowhere, leans in and whispers, "You're not perfect," in a voice that does not belong in a children's cartoon. And the ending of The Great Fusilli, where Courage's owners get turned into lifeless puppets with button eyes, that one still feels like it wandered from a Twilight Zone episode and nobody stopped it. John R. Dilworth, the show's creator, pulled inspiration from old horror films, surreal animation, and even early internet visuals, which explains why so many moments feel like they weren't made for kids at all. Cartoon Network questioned some episodes, but the show kept pushing because audiences loved it, especially kids who like that strange mix of fear and curiosity. What stayed with people was that creeping anxiety the show built before anything even walked on the screen.
Thundercats are on the move. Thundercats are loose. Feel the magic, hear the roar. Thundercats are loose. Thundercats.
Thundercats has its reputation as a fun, swashbuckling 80s cartoon with cool swords and heroic speeches. But once you actually revisit it, you realize it's way darker than people remember. The very first episode doesn't tiptoe around the stakes, it obliterates the Thundercats' entire home planet. Thundera doesn't fall, doesn't get conquered, doesn't even get a dramatic farewell. It explodes, and the survivors watch it happen from space, trapped in a ship they can't control. Jaga stays awake to guide the vessel and dies alone, his last moments happening off-screen in a way that felt surprisingly heavy for a kids' show. When the Thundercats finally crash on Third Earth, the series leans hard into dark fantasy. Mum Ra, the undead sorcerer who lives inside a tomb lined with smoky green braziers and ancient spirits, is the highlight of this tone. Kids weren't used to villains who looked like actual corpses. His transformation, ancient spirits of evil transform this decayed form, still feels intense. Lightning crackles, his bones stretch, he screams through clenched teeth, and suddenly he's a giant monster fueled by black magic. The show didn't shy away from the disturbing storylines either. There's an episode where a ghost warrior is resurrected and rampages across the planet. Another explores a race of robot bears whose entire village is destroyed by mutants. Even Lion-O's coming-of-age trials are grim.
You need help. Those stun darts aren't doing much good.
No, they never do.
Then why do you use them?
Because we would not want to hurt anyone.
He's forced to fight each member of his team alone, then face Mum Ra in a duel that feels way too serious for a cartoon designed to sell action figures. Behind the scenes, the writers were intentionally crafting something epic. More Lord of the Rings than He-Man. But that meant dealing with darker themes, extinction, curses, rituals, haunted ruins, and battles where the threat felt real. Kids might not have understood everything happening on screen, but they felt the weight of it. Thundercats entertained kids, sure, but it also exposed them to some surprisingly dark fantasy ideas along the way. If you were a kid who watched The Last Unicorn expecting something gentle and sparkly, this movie probably blindsided you. On the surface, it looks like a soft, dreamy fantasy about a magical horse. But the actual story? It's about extinction, captivity, regret, and the fear of losing your identity forever, all wrapped in a haunting soundtrack that makes everything feel 10 times heavier. The plot follows a unicorn who learns she may be the last of her kind. That's already a rough emotional starting point, but things escalate fast. Her first major encounter is with the Red Bull, a huge flaming bull shaped like a demon that charges at her with relentless aggression. The scenes where it drives the unicorns into the sea are genuinely terrifying because they're not framed as epic fantasy battles. They're hunts. The unicorn runs, trips, panics, and the bull just keeps going. Then there's Mommy Fortuna's Midnight Carnival. As a kid, you don't forget the harpy, a furious, shrieking creature with massive wings, multiple breasts, and a hatred for everything alive. Mommy Fortuna locks it up knowing full well it will kill her someday, and she's almost proud of that.
Now cage her.
It's one of the strangest, darkest dynamics in any animated film of the era. But the part that really rattled kids was the forced transformation. Turning the unicorn into Lady Amalthea feels pretty violent. She screams, she collapses, and suddenly she's stuck in a human body, feeling fear and pain for the first time. Her confusion and sadness are played completely straight. The film stays haunting because it wasn't really made for children. Peter S. Beagle's novel was written with adults in mind, and the movie never fully softened those themes. Kids went in expecting a fairy tale, and the movie left kids with this sad, uneasy feeling they couldn't explain. Now, Fire and Ice is one of those movies that parents rented thinking, oh, it's a fantasy cartoon, how bad can it be? The answer? Very bad. For any kid who wasn't expecting a rotoscoped fever dream full of violence, near nudity, and monsters that move just a little too realistically, Ralph Bakshi and Frank Frazetta teamed up for this one, and if you know their work, you already understand why it was absolutely not designed for small children. The opening alone clears out any expectations of a light adventure. A tidal wave of ice smashes through entire villages while people run for their lives, and the animation shows everything. Bodies falling, homes splintering, characters being overtaken in seconds. It's the kind of opening sequence that makes you sit up because it feels like the film skipped the warm-up part and jumped straight into apocalypse mode. The villains add even more nightmare fuel. Necron, the icy tyrant, he revels in power. There's a scene where he forces Princess Tigra to crawl across a frozen floor while he mocks her desperation.
Woman, I spit on peace. I spit on you.
Meanwhile, his subhuman soldiers chase people through forests and swamps with this unnervingly smooth, animalistic movement thanks to the rotoscoping. They don't look like cartoon monsters. They look like people acting like monsters, which is somehow even worse. The swamp creatures are another unforgettable piece. They burst out of the water with sticky, sinew motions and drag characters under without giving viewers time to process what even happened. As a kid, you're left sitting there wondering why this animated adventure suddenly feels like a survival horror movie. Fire and Ice wasn't made with children in mind, but the VHS rental era didn't care. If the box art looked cool, it ended up in the living room, and this one delivered pure, unfiltered fantasy brutality. The Secret of NIMH is one of the films that tricks you with soft, painted backgrounds and adorable character designs, and then quietly drags you into a world full of lab experiments, grief, and genuine danger. Most kids who watched it weren't expecting a story about medical testing and death, but that's exactly what Don Bluth delivered. The plot follows Miss Brisby, a widowed field mouse trying to save her sick son before the plow destroys their home.
Mommy, we can't leave Timmy.
Go with Andy's rule. I've got to try and stop that thing.
Wait! You're out of your mind! Brisby, come back!
That alone is stressful, but the real shock comes when she learns the truth about her late husband and the rats of NIMH. The movie doesn't gloss over what happened in the lab. The escape flashback is burned into many childhood memories. Rats electrocuted in cages, syringes plunging into their bodies, animals collapsing from failed experiments, all while the survivors scramble through vents in a desperate bid for freedom. For a lot of kids, that was their first exposure to the idea of scientific cruelty. The great owl scene is another moment that stayed with people. Miss Brisby enters a giant hollow tree full of bones, dust, and webs that looks like they've been untouched for decades. The owl descends slowly from the ceiling, shedding debris with every movement, speaking in a low, echoing voice that feels more like a ghost than a creature.
Brisby? Mrs. Jonathan Brisby?
Why, yes. He was my husband. But how do you know about him?
Nicodemus, with his glowing eyes and parchment-thin skin, added yet another unsettling layer. Even the final confrontation, Jenner's betrayal, the stabbing, the near drowning, is portrayed with a realism that animated films at the time usually avoided. Bluth left Disney to make movies with more emotional weight, and NIMH was his opening statement. It wasn't meant to traumatize kids, but it didn't soften anything either, which is exactly why it lingered so powerfully in their minds. Plague Dogs is the kind of movie that nobody warned kids about. Parents saw an animated cover featuring two dogs and assumed it was from the same people who made Watership Down, which was true, but they didn't realize that this story was even darker, grimmer, and far more emotionally punishing. It begins with one of the most upsetting openings in any animated film. Rolf, a black Labrador, is forced to swim inside a metal tank until he nearly drowns. Scientists stand above him with clipboards, calmly taking notes while he panics and sinks. That's the tone setter. No warm-up, no gentle easing in, just trauma. After escaping the laboratory, Rolf and Snitter run across the English countryside trying to survive. Their freedom never feels triumphant, it feels desperate. They're starving, confused, and constantly hunted by humans who believe they're carrying a deadly plague. One scene that sticks with people is the fox hunt. The dogs finally meet another friendly creature, only for hunters to kill it, leaving Snitter traumatized and Rolf furious.
And you think you could help us to live out here? Aye. Us Todds were used to running, till the dark comes anyway.
The dark? What's the dark?
That's the place when you stop running for good.
It's a beautifully drawn moment that hits much harder than any children's film should. The movie doesn't shy away from showing the dog's mental deterioration either. Snitter suffers hallucinations caused by brain surgery performed on him in the lab. Rolf grows more feral as the story continues. The government response escalates from concern to outright extermination orders.
Tomorrow they will begin an intensive search of the most likely areas, and they will continue until the dogs are found and destroyed.
The tension builds in a way that feels more like a thriller than an animated drama. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers aimed for realism. It was basically an adult critique of animal testing and government secrecy, but because it was animated and shared creators with Watership Down, it slipped into living rooms unprepared. The ending varies by version, but none of them leave children with the comfort they were expecting. Watership Down has fooled more parents than any other animated film in history. They saw rabbits on the cover and assumed it was a gentle story about woodland creatures. Instead, they put on a movie that opens with a prophetic vision of blood spilling across fields while the sun turns black. Kids didn't get a warm, slow introduction. They got a nightmare wrapped in watercolor backgrounds. The story follows a group of rabbits fleeing their warren after one of them, Fiver, foresees a horrific disaster.
We've got to go away from the warren, all of us.
Go away?
Yes, before it's too late.
There's something wrong. What's he on about?
What's the matter, do you think?
And that disaster arrives in the form of bulldozers. As a kid, watching rabbits suffocate underground while their home collapses is something you don't forget. The movie doesn't cut away. It shows paws scratching at the dirt, panic breathing, and the desperate scramble to escape. The violence doesn't stop there. The rabbits encounter predators, snares, and a fascist-style warren ruled by General Woundward, a scarred brute who treats dissent like a crime. The final battle is shockingly intense for animation. Teeth tear through fur, blood sprays, and rabbits collapse from exhaustion and wounds. Kids expecting a Disney-style conflict were not ready for a fight scene where you can actually see characters' skin ripped open. One of the most disturbing sequences comes from Black Rabbit of Inlay, a skeletal shadow figure who appears like a silent messenger of death. It floats into the story without explanation, which only makes it more unsettling for young viewers. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers were committed to portraying nature realistically, as brutal and indifferent as it often is. That commitment is why the movie became infamous. It wasn't trying to traumatize kids, it just didn't expect so many kids would be watching. Decades later, Watership Down is still the gold standard of cartoons that scared an entire generation. And honestly, it earned that title. Alright, confession time. Which one of these got to you? The haunted dogs, the deranged barber, the rabbits waging literal war, or did a completely different cartoon scramble your brain as a kid? Drop it in the comments. If you want to support the channel, we really appreciate you leaving us a super thanks, and I've left the DVD links below so you can revisit these very questionable childhood choices. Thanks for hanging out today, and remember, childhood TV was basically a mystery box. Sometimes you got talking animals, sometimes you got emotional damage dressed in pastel colors. Stick around. The next deep dive might just unlock another memory you didn't know you were still carrying. See you next time.